landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Feet, down at 2, feels good, 20 feet, going down at 2, 10 feet, 10 feet, contact, stop, push, engine stop, engine arm, proceed, command override off, load control ahead, hold, pings auto. Okay, Houston, the Challenger has landed. Houston, you can tell America that Challenger is a Taurus Littrow.
"50 years ago today, Apollo 17 Commander Gene Cernan and Lunar Module pilot Jack Schmitt guided Challenger to a pinpoint landing on a barren rock-strewn area of the moon called Taurus Littrow. A half-century later, NASA's newest moon explorer, the Orion spacecraft, is barreling its way back home after circumnavigating the moon and beyond in an elliptical distant retrograde orbit, now less than 2 hours away from splashing down in the Pacific Ocean west of Baja, California, to complete its shakedown mission that has opened a new era of deep space exploration. Good morning from the Artemis Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston and Mission Control, where the entry team of flight controllers is on duty, ready to bring Orion home to complete a 25-and-a-half-day mission. As he was for the launch of Orion more than 25 days ago, NASA Flight Director Judd Freeling is leading the entry team here in the White Flight Control Room. The target for Orion is growing larger in the field of view, moment by moment. This is a live view of the Earth from a distance of 15,000 miles away. About 3 hours and 40 minutes ago, Orion conducted the final major maneuver of its mission, a return trajectory correction burn of its thrusters to further fine-tune its path toward its splashdown site in the Pacific. We'll be heading out to the Pacific shortly for the first in a series of reports from the scene where Orion will be recovered. After launching atop the Space Launch System more than 25 days ago and traversing some 1.4 million miles in its circuitous orbit past the moon and back, the most critical phase of the Artemis 1 mission for Orion is at hand. It is homecoming day, so let's run down the milestones you'll be hearing about and seeing over the next couple of hours. Next up for Orion will be the crew module's separation from the European service module. That pyrotechnic separation is scheduled at 11 a.m. Central Time, just 20 minutes before Orion begins its entry into the Earth's atmosphere at an altitude of 3,200 statute miles. Now, we had planned for Orion to conduct a maneuver called the raise maneuver, a 16-second thruster firing to orient itself at the proper angle for its plunge back into the atmosphere. But the latest targeting for Orion from the flight dynamics folks here in Mission Control indicates such a precise trajectory for the spacecraft, it was determined that the raise maneuver was not required. That could still change following crew module, service module separation, but at the moment, the raise maneuver will not be required. The major objective of this mission is to test the spacecraft's heat shield against the searing heat of entry, where temperatures will build up to around 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit around Orion, half as hot as the outer surface of the Sun, twice as hot as the temperatures endured by returning space shuttles and other crew vehicles. Orion will perform what is called a skip entry. dipping into the atmosphere, then lifting out of the atmosphere and dipping back in like a flat rock skimming across a pond. This will provide aerobraking for the vehicle, will help to dissipate some of the vehicle's inertia, and will provide data needed in the future to select multiple splashdown sites for crewed missions. We are expecting 2 periods during entry when the buildup of heat-generated plasma around Orion will block communications and the receipt of data with flight controllers here in Houston. The first blackout should begin around 11:20 a.m. Central Time for just under 5 minutes, right around the time of peak heating on Orion, as it travels about 25 times the speed of sound. The second blackout period is expected around 11:29 a.m. Central Time for just under 3 minutes, right after the skip entry maneuver is complete. About 5 minutes after we regain communications with Orion, the pre-programmed commands stored on board will trigger the deployment of 3 parachutes at the top of Orion to pull the forward bay cover off of the crew module. That will initiate the sequential deployment of 2 drogue chutes and 3 pilot parachutes, followed by the 3 large main chutes to slow down Orion, enabling it to gently splash down in the Pacific. The current splashdown time, 11:39 and 42 seconds a.m. Central Time, 9:39 and 42 seconds a.m. Pacific Time. We'll be talking more about those parachutes shortly. The weather forecast at the splashdown site west of Baja California is excellent. The Spaceflight Meteorology Group here at the Johnson Space Center has just issued a forecast calling for scattered clouds at 1,700 feet, winds peaking to about 9 knots with periodic wave heights of about 5 feet. That is all within flight rule limits, and it should be a splendid day for Orion's homecoming. Out in the Pacific, aboard the prime recovery ship, the USS Portland, embedded with the Kennedy Space Center's Exploration Ground Systems Recovery Team and the U.S. Navy, is my colleague from the Kennedy Space Center, Daryl Nail. Daryl, good morning to you, and as they say in the Navy, give us a sit rep on preparations out there.
Well, good morning to you, Rob, and that's right. We're live on the deck just outside the bridge here on the USS Portland with a fantastic view of the area of splashdown. I just spoke with the recovery team. They say we are currently 5 miles away from the splashdown location right here in the Pacific Ocean. The location, as you mentioned, just off the coast of Baja, Mexico. We got the great weather report, seas, as you mentioned, 4 to 5 feet. We're looking good there. Let me show you the bridge deck where we are currently positioned. This is looking forward for the ship. I talked to Captain John Ryan, who says that he currently has the ship in a racetrack going around the location near where splashdown is, just upwind of it, so that the debris that comes down, that being the crew module and the parachutes, the forward bay cover, when it separates, will be all downwind of us. Now, preparations are already underway. We can hear the helicopter engines running, so we want to take you to a live view of the flight deck. This is towards the back of the ship, where just 5 minutes ago, the Navy started the engines on 2 of the 3 Navy MH-60s, or Nighthawk helicopters, that will be used for the operation. On your screen, the 2 helicopters, which will start looking for Orion at an altitude of about 50,000 feet, should be able to quickly lock on to Orion's heat shield, which should be still very hot after reaching 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the heat of reentry. The second helicopter will track the forward bay cover, a 1,000-pound, 9.5-foot wide titanium cover on top of Orion, which protects the parachutes during the heat of reentry. It is jettisoned to allow them to come out. Now, NASA's plan going in was to recover it, but they've made an adjustment due to the seas and the limitations of a small boat crane needed to lift it out of the water. Both helicopters, if you can see just to the left of that helicopter at the bottom of your screen, have GSS cameras mounted to them. These are ultra-high-def cameras to record 8K resolution video for engineering purposes. Now, with those helicopters just minutes away from flying out, let's take a look underneath this very flight deck. You can see into the well deck, and this is the multi-purpose capability of this vessel, the USS Portland. Down on the well deck, is where the final phase of recovery will happen. 2 teams of Navy divers are preparing to launch the small boats. You see them at the bottom of your screen, just partially protruding there at the bottom. Those are inflatable boats that the Navy will use. 6 in all will pre-position themselves in the open sea to recover debris from the descent operation and then, of course, secure the Orion crew module itself. The Navy dive team will also take above water and underneath water photography of the heat shield before the crew module is moved. This is for all engineering purposes so they can see it freshly returned from space. Once the divers have Orion stabilized with tow ropes, you see that bright yellow structure right dead in the middle of your screen. That is the cradle that the boats and the winch lines will pull into position and put it right down on top of that cradle. They will flood that deck with water, roughly about 6 feet, and then with a careful choreography of winch line and lines being pulled and maintained by sailors, they'll put it in position for its ride back to San Diego. Now, coming up, we'll speak to one of the Navy divers who will be in the water helping. In fact, he's on deck standing by in just a few minutes. He's ready to go into the water. We'll get some words from him before he goes out on his assignment. Looking good on the ship right now. Rob, we'll send it back to you in Houston.
Thanks, Daryl. And again, a live view from Orion as it continues its pinpoint journey back towards its splashdown site, not far from where you are out in the Pacific. We will be going back to Daryl Nail on the USS Portland frequently during the course of today's coverage. Orion is wrapping up, as we said earlier, a mission that will have spanned 1.4 million miles, having flown further away from Earth than any human-rated spacecraft designed to return humans to Earth. And of course, the big test that's coming up, the ultimate test of its heat shield that will repel temperatures that will build up around the base of Orion to about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit at peak heating as Orion barrels back into the Earth's atmosphere. It has been an incredibly successful mission for the Orion spacecraft. We'll be talking to a variety of people about all that, officials and managers and engineers throughout the course of our coverage today. But for the moment, let's take a visual and interactive look at this mission with NASA's Philip Hargrove, who will use the moon board to explain it all.
Yes, welcome to the moon board here at the Apollo Saturn V Center. It's been a super exciting month since the Artemis 1 launch. So let's take a look back at everything that happened just a few miles away from where I'm standing right now. Now on November 16th at 1:47 a.m., the SLS lifted off from Launch Pad 39B here at Kennedy Space Center, and it put on an incredible show for everybody watching here from the Space Coast. I can't even describe to you how amazing it was to watch that core stage. Those solid rocket boosters provide over 8 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. Now, those boosters and the core stage got us going from 0 to over 17,000 miles per hour in just about 8 minutes. And then once all that propellant was depleted, the responsibility was passed on to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Now, the first job of the ICPS was to perform a perigee raise maneuver. And this means that we're getting into a low Earth circular orbit that allows us to deploy those solar panels, start harvesting energy, and do systems checkouts to make sure that we are ready for our journey. And we stayed in that orbit for about 30 minutes, and then we did our translunar injection burn. This is the primary responsibility of the ICPS because it gives us the energy to escape low Earth orbit and commits us on a path out to the moon. Now, once it completed that burn, the ICPS separated from the Orion, and it performed one final burn to completely leave the Earth-Moon system. And after doing that, Orion was on its way out to the moon. So it spent about 4 days heading out towards the moon. And then we quickly dipped in about 60 miles above the surface of the moon and did an outbound powered flyby. Now that powered flyby means that we're taking advantage of the speed we already have, the gravity of the moon, and the energy we get from the service module's engines in order to target our orbit. And the orbit that we were targeting is called a DRO, or a distant retrograde orbit. And what that means is that instead of moving counterclockwise relative to the Earth like the moon does naturally, we are moving clockwise. So we're going in this opposite direction. That's what retrograde means. And distant means that we're We are going farther away than we have with any human spacecraft before. We're orbiting about 38,000 miles above the surface of the moon. And this is a really convenient orbit because we're able to stay there without having to use a ton of fuel for station keeping. And it also provides a safe, efficient path back home when we're ready. So this allowed us to learn how to operate in deep space, one of the core tenets of this mission. And then once we were ready, we started our trip back home. So we performed one more powered flyby, this time targeting our return, where we lit up those engines as we dipped close to the surface of the moon. And then we began our return transit, which took about 7 days, and that leads us to today. So next time we'll talk a bit more about what that return looks like and what our entry is actually going to look like. But until then, back to you.
Thank you, Philip. And again, a live view of Orion closing in on planet Earth, now about 11,000 miles away from Earth, as it continues a very, very precise trajectory for a splashdown that is scheduled at 11:39 and 42 seconds a.m. Central Time this morning. For Orion, launch from the Kennedy Space Center occurred on November 16th on the world's most powerful rocket, the Space Launch System. The first outbound powered flyby of the moon was performed 5 days later on November 21st, dipping to within about 81 miles of the lunar surface. That placed Orion on a very precise trajectory for its ultimate goal, that racetrack trajectory called the distant retrograde orbit, that would allow Orion the time and the space environment needed to test its mettle. 4 days later, Orion executed an engine firing to enter into that orbit, and the next day, Orion surpassed the record set during Apollo 13 52 years ago for the greatest distance ever traveled by a human-rated spacecraft designed to return humans to the Earth. On November 28th, Orion reached its farthest distance from the Earth, some 268,000 miles, before departing the distant retrograde orbit on December 1st. And this past Monday, Orion conducted a 3-minute, 27-second engine firing behind the moon to whip around Earth's closest neighbor for the final leg of its flight, passing to within 80 miles of the surface, turning for home, and its splashdown that is scheduled just 1 hour, 21 minutes, 44 seconds from now. The initial mission of the Artemis 1 program was always designed to be a test flight, wringing out all of the systems of the Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft, and for more than 25 days it did just that, setting the stage for a crew to board an Orion vehicle for a trip around the moon in 2 years. So with that, out in the Pacific, where Orion will be splashing down not long from now, we're going to go back here in a moment to Daryl Nail, who's standing by with one of the first persons that will actually be in the water to execute the recovery and the securing of the Orion spacecraft. Daryl?
That's right, Rob, and his name is Wayne Shearer, and he is the Navy diver first class aboard boat number 2. He is the lead on one of the 2 small boats called Cricks, which are essentially small inflatable Navy boats. He's just about 20 or so minutes away from getting into that boat. Thank you, Wayne, for coming up here and making some time for us to tell us about the operation today.
Of course, sir.
So tell me exactly how your team goes about securing this spacecraft after it comes back from space, splashes down the water just a few miles from us.
Well, sequence of events are going to go splash down, wait 2 hours. We're going to do a hazard analysis, make sure there's no gas coming off of it. We're going to come up, take those pictures like you said earlier for those engineering purposes. Once that's done, then we put the what's called a pony collar on it, and then basically it's a sequence of events of pulling all those ropes out like you said earlier and pulling it into the well deck. Easy day.
Easy day, and we know that there are certainly going to be some challenges, right? Seas are 4 to 5 foot currently, which is within your limit. Let's take a look now underneath the well deck to the boats that are currently being prepared. You're really literally going to be going down here and right to that boat after we conclude our interview. How will you manage the 4 to 5 foot seas with a bobbing spacecraft and bobbing inflatable boat with your team?
Well, this is just another day in the park for us. You know, we've trained for the last 1.5 years for this. We've been in worse seas than this.